Is looking good important? Well, duh. It's a subject we're going to come back to over and over in this class, but having stuff that's attractive, having documents that look good, isn't just cosmetic and it's not just vanity. It's all about usability. Document design is really about two things. The first, there is a certain amount of general attractiveness you need. If your stuff looks, frankly, but ugly, nobody's really going to pay a lot of attention to it, or you'll get negative attention. If your stuff is attractive, people will be more drawn towards it. But the more important aspect of document design is that how your document looks affects how usable it is, how quickly people can get information out of it, how easily people can distinguish between sections. All of this stuff can be improved by putting some thought into how your document looks. Now, I know this is something you never really had to think about in your Comp 1 classes, but that's a major difference here. How things look really plays into how people use them. Think of your own experience using stuff. If it's easy to find, you're not going to have to think about it all that much. If your document looks ugly and nasty, chances are you're just going to throw it over your shoulder or something like that. Now, here is two examples of design: good design and bad design. Let's focus on the bad design thing first. That would be on the left hand section of the screen. There's a few things going on here. The font choices are kind of boring. Um, Sloppy layout. You notice how many words are broken up in hyphens and in the wrong places. Software, algorithm, in formation. Not great. Um, it isn't consistent in the way it lays stuff out. The headings all look different. Is there a structure there behind them? The way the page is filled out, it's cram packed full of stuff. It looks like a giant monstrous block of information shoved in your face. And you know what happens when you just get too much stuff shoved in your face at once? The average reader will look at it and go, so you don't want to be that. Good design should walk you through the process. Good design should look natural and clean. Good design should make the organization explicit. So let's look at the right hand side of the page. There's a lot more space. It's not nearly as cramped. That's a good thing. Um, the fonts are nice and clean. The fonts are also orderly. You notice the heading is in a different type of font than the body text. That makes the headings jump out to us. You notice the bulleted list is indented a little bit. That makes that information look separate. We know it's a list before we even look at it. It looks more professional. The underlining is not a good thing anymore. Underlining comes from the days where people were doing this typewriter style. We're not using typewriters nowadays. Italicized is good. And you notice they're not overdoing the bold. I think emphasis is the only word bolded that's not in the heading, as opposed to all the bolding on the bad design side of the page. There's enough room to breathe, single spaces after the punctuation, good hyphenization. Is that a word? Yeah, sure, why not? And it generally makes the whole document look a whole lot less daunting. Now, we're going to hit a lot of these things this time. We'll hit a number more when we do our second part of document design. But for now, let's talk about fonts. You know exactly what this font is from, don't you? Fonts at their best establish a mood, establish a certain look. And you know that this is Disney, and you know your expectations are going to come out of it. Now, even with Disney stuff, would you expect to see a paragraph out of this stuff? It's clearly not designed for that. It's clearly designed for emphasis, for headlines, for headings, and such. Fonts can be broken down into two distinct categories. Serif fonts is the first one. Now, what is a serif is the question everybody's asking. Well, when you have written out text, printed text, you see the little hooky things on the end of the T's, on the end of the I's. Those are officially called serifs. What they do is they help make a good visual distinction between letters. You also notice that the serif fonts isn't uniform thickness all the way throughout. It thins out a little bit at the base of the second stroke of the end. It flares out a bit at the ends. It creates a lot of visual distinction. A sans serif font is a font with no serifs. It's a lot plainer looking. It's a lot smoother looking. It's a lot more even looking. They each have their uses, and we'll get into those in a second. So, serif is little hooky things. And as far as some of the examples of serifs that you will find, Times New Roman is the default. It's the serif font that people think of when they think of serif fonts. International standardization organizations will tell you Times New Roman 12 is the default font. I have nothing against Times New Roman, but one of the things we'll talk about in a bit is that we're going to experiment with fonts a little bit more, so I don't want to see the boring, the average, the normal. Another serif font is Courier. You know, the one that looks like a typewriter? It's not a particularly attractive font, but it's one that's designed to evoke a certain old look. It still has little hooky things on the end of the C, on the end of the strokes of the U, so on and so forth. There are more attractive ones. Badani is a nice one. You notice it's a little bit more compact than Times New Roman. The words are pushed together a little bit more. What serif fonts are good for? First, they look very, very formal. When you see a serif font, you expect formality. There's a reason why government publications are always done in serif fonts. When you print them out, they're very readable on the page. Here's something that computer technology has gotten amazing over the last several decades. However, a screen cannot reach the levels of resolution that you can printing. Printing is always going to be tighter. You're never going to get to a level where the pixels flare out. It will be smoother. And that's where the little hooky things, the serifs, really help you out because they help add a different layer of distinction between the various letters. Much more readable on the page. So, this is where you should use it. In the printed page, body text. It is the main bit where your text will go. Even if you're doing a document electronically, if it's designed like a printed document, you're going to treat it like a printed document. So even though we're turning everything as file attachments here, I still want you to treat them as if they're printed documents. So we have the serif fonts. Now let's talk about the other type, the sans serif fonts. They're obviously fonts without serifs. Some examples, the ones you think of, Lucida is one of the stock ones that come on most computers. Franklin is a bigger, thicker one. It has more of a bold headline-like approach. Arial is the serif font we think of when we think of serif fonts. The sans serif font we think of when we think of sans serif fonts. It's pretty much one of the defaults. That's why I'm going to suggest you don't use it, but we'll get into that. The benefits of sans serif fonts is they look more modern, they look more technical. we're used to seeing them on technical documents. If you're looking for the page, a serif font works better because the hooks help visually distinguish the letters. We can't count on screens having as good a resolution. So when you do something electronically that's designed to be consumed electronically, you tend to use the sans serif font because you will have less resolution problems. Now, how do you use it when we construct documents? In electronic documents, it would take the place of a serif font. When something is electronic on a screen, you pretty much swap the rules around. On a printed document, you're going to want to use your sans serif font for headings to visually distinguish them from the body text. If it's a different style of font, the difference between heading and text is going to be very, very obvious. You'll also use it for captions. If you have text below a picture, if you mark something as figure one, keeping it in a sans serif font will again visually distinguish it from the body text. Now, these aren't the only types of fonts, they're the two major divisions. If we wanted to get into it, we could also do script, distressed, condensed, and rounded. Incidentally, there's something kind of weird going on here. Script is supposedly feminine and distressed is supposedly masculine. I don't know about that. Um, it's language which designers use. What a font has to do with masculinity is kind of beyond me. Anyway, script obviously has a non-business feel. You want something to look as handwriting-y as possible. Distressed is when the letter isn't completely filled, when there's like granularity to the letters or where it starts to look eroded. I mostly see these in heavy metal band flyers. Condensed is when the font is crushed together. Um, bold, strong, modern, they say. And it's also if you have too large words that you need to shrink down. Condensed actually puts less space between the letters. It actually makes the letters themselves narrower. Rounded, they call soft, childlike, and friendly. I don't know. The ones we'll be working with are the serif and sans serif fonts as the main styles of fonts we will use. And there's tons of fonts out there. If you ever want to get lost, go to a website like DaFont, DAFONT.com, and they've got thousands of free fonts. Many of them very interesting, some of them kind of ugly, but there you go. There are loads of opportunities, and the further you get into visual design, the more you're going to have to think about these things. I'm a musician and I make flyers, so I have a huge selection of fonts on my computer because I want the flyers to establish a certain look, and that gives me a little bit more freedom. If you're doing something for public use, you can be a little bit more open in terms of the fonts you use. Internal documents, official documents, the rules tend to get stricter. There are some fonts I want you to avoid using at any and all cost. The first one, Times New Roman. Now, I told you before that Times New Roman was the default font, and yeah, it is. But since it's the default font, if you use it on your resume or any document, it's going to look like every single other document. You want to be able to visually distinguish yourself. Times New Roman is easy. Find yourself a different serif body text font. If you look at the course documents, I tend to use Jura. Jura. There are plenty of free versions of it out there, and I'm in fact using a free one. It gives a slightly different look, but there's a ton of them out there. Times New Roman is just I don't have the imagination to look for another font. Arial is the default sans serif font, which is the reason you don't want to use it, because again, you don't want to look like every other person out there. If you can develop your own design sensibility, if your material all looks like it comes from the same person, but it looks like it comes from someone different, then you're going to stand out from the crowd. And particularly when we're talking about the job application material, but in most types of documents, standing out from the crowd is a good thing. Comic Sans, there's no reason to ever use Comic Sans unless you're lettering comic books. That's literally what it was designed for. You certainly don't want to use it in real life. There are others that you never want to use because they just look, frankly, ugly as sin. Brush script, particularly, it has no space whatsoever in formal writing. Comic Sans may be the most hated font ever, yeah. Curls, ugh. It kind of strikes you as the person who works at the arts and crafts store who's just learning how to use their computer and wants to make a flyer font. Hobo is one that is. The curves are weird. It looks weird. Papyrus, use only papyrus for selling crystals and incense. That's a pretty good descriptor there. It's the default I want to look like I'm Egyptian without doing any extra work font. None of these are particularly appropriate for business writing, and they're kind of cliche for any other type of writing. When I tell you that Comic Sans is a bad font, I ain't lying. People, if you use Comic Sans on your resumes, someone will throw them away immediately. I can guarantee you that. It's appropriate only in a few places. You never want to use it when you're serious. Now, in terms of using fonts, you have to have a certain level of restraint. You can't just throw in 15 varieties of fonts and expect it to look good. Look at this one. This again looks like a drunk monkey fell onto your keyboard. Some tips for using fonts. Remember your message. Think about what you're trying to do. If you're doing a more formal document, use a more formal font. You can get less formal if you're doing a less formal kind of thing. Keep novelty and unique fonts to headers, subtitles, and keywords only. And as you go up in formality, probably not at all. Use easily readable fonts for large blocks and bodies of text. And this is something a lot of people forget. There are any number of fonts that you just can't decipher. Go to Google, do a search for heavy metal band name, and you'll see any number of people using these eroded, distorted fonts that you just simply can't read. Half the heavy metal bands, I look at their logos and I have no idea what their name is. That's not a good idea. Looking neat, looking cool, all fine, but it's gotta be readable. 4. This is the big one. Think in terms of contrast and unity. Serif plus sans serif fonts are typically used together for their differences, but you want two that play good together. You don't want a tremendously informal sans serif font with a tremendously formal serif font. You don't want, say, you don't want to use Bookman condensed for your body text and then use something light and airy or even something big and heavy and blocky like Impact for your sans serif font. When in doubt, go for classics. But there's a lot of them. Garamond is a great font. Jura is a good font. Georgia is a good font. They're all within the realm of Times New Roman, but they're just different enough to look a little bit distinct. Now, if you have to mix fonts, stay consistent. And the way we'll talk about the way I recommend them. Well, actually, no, I've already talked about this. Use a sans serif font for your headings. Use a serif font for your body text. If you're doing something designed electronically, you reverse the rules, but you can pretty much say your serif font goes for body text, your sans serif font goes for headings. You're going to hear me repeat that one over and over. Use italics, bolds, and all caps sparingly. If you emphasize everything, you're not emphasizing anything. It reminds me of a student in a theory class I took who highlighted pretty much the entire page. You're doing the same thing if you try to bold 3/4 of the words there. it loses its specialness. You use these things sparingly and they have impact. Proper size. Don't go below 12-point font as a rule, particularly when doing the job correspondence assignment. I've seen any number of students who will just go straight to the Word templates for resumes without altering them. And some of those templates, I don't know what the designers were thinking of, because I've seen some with like 8-point text. I've seen people turn in documents with 6-point text. Now, there's the natural effect that once you start to get older, your vision starts to go downhill. When you hit the age of 40, if you don't need glasses now, you will need glasses because your eyes will just simply deteriorate. And if I'm looking at an 8-point font, I'm going to have to work to figure out what it says. Do you want someone to have to work to figure out what your document says, particularly when it's a resume? I don't think so. And sheesh, I've had someone turn in stuff with a 6-point font. There's no hope of me reading it, and I'm definitely not going to put in the effort. It's your job to be clear and communicate and grab me. Serif font for body text, sans serif font for headings and captions. Use the same. You can distinguish it with bold, you can distinguish it with italics if you want to separate out different levels, but you use one serif font for body text, one sans serif font for headings and captions. And unless you think I'm getting a little bit overboard here, this is an excerpt, only an excerpt, from the IRS Style Guide. Standard fonts. The official IRS standard fonts include Helvetica and Times Roman font families. Times Roman is legible and highly recommended for text-heavy documents. Times New Roman you can use if you're going web. They're different things, technically. Helvetica is the more professional version of Arial. If you're going something online, you tend to stick to the more default fonts because more people have them available to them. But you want to very much have a format and stick with it. If they go on in here. What I love is in number 4, the extended Helvetica family of fonts includes Helvetica Condensed for a more technical, precise look when space is a consideration, and Helvetica Rounded for applications that require a warm, friendly approach. The IRS has a font for being warm and friendly. Just let that sink in for a minute. This is also a matter for the university. If you go into the university's website, we have available the university brand guide and the style guide, and they talk specifically about how they want the university to present themselves in terms of text. We'll look at the brand guide first. There's a lot of things that we don't really need to talk about right here, where they go into its vision and its values, but there are plenty of things that we do want to look at. Writing style, we talk about voice and tone. Remember, brand voice is much like a person's voice. Every voice sounds a little bit different. It's one way to distinguish between people you know. Tone is the added layer of nuance that caters to a specific audience or feeling. And when you say it like that, you can understand that the university has a particular image they want to put across. Most big corporations will have these kind of documents available because they want to present a unified voice. You can go to it's just do a search for guide on our website and you can get to this. And it has a UT writing style guide, the voice and tone guide, well, which we'll look at in a little bit. It talks about logos and the appropriate use of them. It gives you files to use. Talks about where you can place them. And where certain phrases are most appropriate. There's even a university icon set. I've downloaded this, but I've yet to figure out a place to actually use it. We have specific colors. I don't know if you noticed, but in the syllabus and the major assignment sheet, I try to use midnight blue for my headings and gold for any hard lines in the text. We have supporting colors recommended. These are the official university fonts. Albright Normal is our sans serif font. Jubilat is the serif font. You can get an idea of the kind of image the university is going after with these. They also have levels for how they want headlines distinguished between the different levels, how you lay out links, how you lay out captions, how you line up numbers. There's alternate typefaces, which are open source, free ones you can get from this link too, and I've used them in some of our stuff as well. Source Sans Pro, which is a close version to the official paid font, and Roboto Slab, which is a close addition to the paid serif font. Now, if we look at the writing guide, it goes into a little bit more detail on how we need stuff laid out, how you line up addresses, what words you can abbreviate, how you're allowed to abbreviate them, official titles, and where you capitalize within those titles, so on and so forth. When you work in a particular institution, they will probably have a style guide. So a lot of what we're talking about here is there are the default rules, but you also have to know that your particular institution might have rules too. It's not just the particular choice of fonts, there's a lot more to it. The other big thing, though, we're going to talk about is how you arrange information. This is one of the default stock images I see when I look at stuff for designers, and you can see how a lot of the sins this has. Probably stuff you're going to get more into if you do a more advanced typesetting, but the spacing between letters is important. The alignment of words is important. The spaces here, I mean, look at how close everything in migraine is crammed together. It makes it harder to read, but do you want it spread out as in GIF? So, let's get on to basic rules for organizing information. First, paragraph is a unit of organization covering a single topic. There are always ways to think about topics, and there are places where you can break a topic into smaller topics. But as a stupid example, this is all information that needs the line before it. It builds into a cohesive whole. Paragraphs are a unit of organization that hit one small thing. Now, if we can always divide this into two paragraphs if we can divide it into two little bits of information. Whenever you have information that has some kind of flow to it, paragraph form. Ordered lists is the particular type of list you use when stuff must be performed in a particular order. We're going to be doing an instructions assignment. If you're telling somebody a set of tasks to do, they need to be numbered to show that they are things that have to be done in that order. Stumble out of bed, swallow aspirin, drink 1 gallon of water, long shower, breakfast of leftover pizza. You need to do these things in the particular order. You're not going to take a shower and then stumble out of bed. It's numbered lists walk us through a procedure. If you're just listing stuff that doesn't have to be performed sequentially, that's where you use an unordered list or a bulleted list. There might be a relationship between these, but it isn't one that involves having to do a particular step. White space. What we're talking about when we talk about white space is the blank space on a paper. It's called white space because normally paper's white. But I might use that term to refer to general amounts of space. I mean, take particular this box here where the text is. Achieve a balance as too much white space tells you the reader you are done, and too little overwhelms the reader's eye. Then you notice there's a whole lot of blank space underneath it. The thing is, when we look at an image, and this is an image of sorts, our eye will go to the blank area, to the lighter area, and to this, the bottom. And it's going to highlight something to us. It's going to highlight that this doesn't fill up the page. Now, if you're giving me a resume, for instance, that doesn't fill up a page and has like 3 inches of white space at the bottom of it, that's going to make me think you don't have enough stuff to fill up the page. Not the kind of idea you want to get across. White space is more than just that, though. White space is a space between the lines as well, underneath, above, between the title and the text. By putting some white space here, if we don't get the message with the different size of font, we get the message with the blank space that we're moving on to a different section. And how you use white space can have a very real effect on how someone reads your document. Look at the no side. It's cram packed. It's more of the stuff. On the yes side, you've got two separate distinct paragraphs. We see that and it registers before we have to think about it. The words are closer together than the paragraphs, but not so close that we have problems distinguishing them. We have enough space to tell us we're moving into a new paragraph. Another example. One on the left, there's space between the paragraphs. There's space between the lines. It's easy enough to read. The one on the right, well, there is space between the paragraphs, but the paragraphs themselves are so cramped because you cramp feeling when you read that. And this goes into basic document layout purposes as well. Another bad example on the left, it's cram-packed with stuff. The paragraphs are tight. There's no extra space between the paragraphs. There's no extra space between the column lines or around the picture or around the heading. And it just kind of makes you feel a little bit claustrophobic. Look at the side on the right. There's more space. It looks calmer. So, headings. We use headings to break stuff into sections because it's easier to retrieve information if it's broken into sections. Think about whenever you've gone through a set of instructions or a user guide or a product guide or anything, you're probably not looking for every bit of information on the project in question. You're probably looking for stuff on one part. Headings help sort that out. Headings, though, need to be visually distinct from the body text. Make them at least 2 points larger than the body text. And then the next level up goes 2 points larger than that, 2 points larger. So if you've got 3 level of headings, you'd have a size 18 as your highest level. Under that, a size 16 point font for the highest level. For the lowest level of headings would be 14, and the body text would be 12. Larger ones let us know it's a larger division. Smaller ones let us know it's a more precise division. Layered headings. You will have those multiple layers, and you can look at the syllabus for an example of this. I'll have like assignments, and I'll break down the types of assignments underneath it. Usually they will be indented or made visually distinct in some way. And you can see it's all about making your organizational scheme apparent. Layered headings. Requirements would be a subdivision. Education would be a subdivision of that. Training would be another subdivision of requirements. Headings need to be visually distinct. We need to be able to visually separate them from the surrounding text. Not only from the body text. Remember, you use a serif font for the body text, a sans serif font for the headings, but also from each other. These headings here need to be different visually. Yes, they're going to be different visually in size, but you can also tweak them a little bit. Bold, italicized, underlined, some combinations thereof. Again, if you look at the syllabus, I use capitalization, all caps sometimes. I use bold sometimes. I use italic sometimes. They're all the same font, so they all have a similar look, but they're different enough to where your eye can see it and immediately see it. Keep in mind, sans serif font. Here is from a syllabus from spring, and you see the distinction. Course catalog, description, course overview are big areas. They're in all caps. They're at a certain size font. The next lowest level would be requirements, which is 2 points smaller, not all caps, and italicized. Visually, you know, boom, I'm going to the next one. And it continues on from there. how you organize information and how clear you make it. If your organization is very clear, then it's going to be very easy for readers to get the information. So those are the basics in document design rules. We're going to go into a lot more detail because there's a lot more to it. Um, but before then, keep these rules in mind, and it never hurts to just really go online, look at a lot of examples, and try to get, via intuition, a good grasp of what makes something attractive and not. The more you start thinking of these things, the easier it's going to be. See you in the next video, guys.